If no known networks are available, no known networks will be joined, but you will be notified of available networks known to the system.
I like to work with the idea of different layers of voice, the different ways that a voice can both be healing or a voice can be used as a method of torture, so it spans a very broad field. I mainly work with my own voice, but I see my writing as a way of combining other people's voices or combining maybe the voices that we experience in society, or rather the words that we experience. And I find that often when you speak things that are not necessarily spoken, usually it places it in another circumstance. And since they're all portrayed with my own voice, kind of creates a uniform feeling rather than the fragmentary sources that they are deriving from.
Not just any goddamn book, but a comfortable coffee table book, a comfortable coffee table book.
And there is this expression which is a body of text, which I'm quite fascinated by, or the definition of a body of text. At the same time, text can come across as very detached from the body, and one often also speaks about, if one is more literate, that one is less in touch with one's physical being, or like the body itself. But with speech, these two parts meet, and language and the physical qualities of your body meet. Like, for instance, you would walk up 10 stairs and then read something. This would affect the way of reading, because you would be probably out of breath. When I read, I've come to take the silences and the breath a lot into consideration, and this kind of becomes a little bit of a metaphor for also how to exist.
Gave us in up, given as in up, given as in gave, give as in give.
When there is a fly passing by, I look at that fly and think, I'm living in the world of the fly. This is the planet of the fly. This year of 2024, one of the main questions that is being guiding the studio thought is, can we decenter humanity from protagonism of the planet in an ethical way? I've been visiting an archaeological piece here in Berlin. This piece was found in Mitte, and it's an oak tree log that inside has many vessels of ceramics. What really was interesting for me, there was no depiction of humanity in those pieces, as we see everywhere today. And then it clicked to me, maybe that's why I'm so interested in those pieces that have been present in humanity for 5,000, 6,000 years. They've been remains that have been remembering, they've been testimonies of what happened here when perhaps the planet was not so much focused on the human body or the human figure, or even before we had this whole concept of what human is. When I'm working in partnership, what I call other than humans, bacteria, fungi, plant, insects, animals. Another ethical question came to me, which was, how can we think about giving rights to other than humans when we, as a humanity, don't have equal rights of humans? There are people who are not accessing human rights as well. And then, for more than a decade, many scholars are pointing out that we are in a moment that they call exiting the Anthropocene. But what does this actually mean in practicality on a daily basis when more and more you see the centrality of the human figure? Everything spins around the human, everything is about the human, everything is for the human. And thus the planet is just a place for the humanity. Isn't an urgent time that we start to think that we are not the focus of the planet anymore, and we cannot be the focus of the planet anymore?
The reason I became an artist is because through making art, through studio work, you could say through process, you know, I can like work out my own relationship to images, you know, and so it's not really a stable thing, and it's not really a fixed thing. It's much more like through choosing to do this with my life, I can spend my time investigating, you know, how I relate to images and what kind of images I get attached to and what kind of images I'm drawn to or repulsed by or feel ambivalent about. I guess the roots of what I do is kind of found footage film, which is a long tradition, and I'll get interested in different types of sources, you know, and it's that interest that kind of motivates the work. So you could say maybe an early phase was a lot of, in the very early 2000s, was collecting like secondhand VHS tapes from charity shops. And I would sit in the studio and I had a small device to digitize VHS to digital and sit sort of fast forwarding, watching, looking for kind of moments that would catch my eye and then digitize them. And then later, sometimes like 2 or 3 years later, they would end up in pieces. I have periods of working purely sonically, that without image. So I'm kind of like gathering and experimenting with kind of music and sampling and kind of fragments of songs or fragments of field recordings or kind of parts of things. And so that's almost like it's its own practice that I go back to regularly and often go back to between projects, you know, and one can kind of get into a flow state with much easier than images.
I remember firelight, I remember firelight.
And so that's this kind of constantly gathering pool, which then when I'm really like more focusedly and consciously working on a new piece, I can sort of draw from, you know. My more recent work has moved more towards animation via, I think, quite a lot of concern with like what it is to like film the still image, and what it is to like introduce this time-based media of like moving image, but like apply it to like a picture. And then more recent things, I've been thinking a lot about like kind of bringing things to life. So kind of like, you know, like reviving images or activating still images artificially and sort of artificially resuscitating these kind of still pictures.
I would say space is the beginning of everything for me. It's what shapes the landscape of the visual aspects, the sonic aspects, and you know how I build the narrative and the storytelling of the experiential possibilities of my work. And I'm very much inspired by a given space, which is how I always work. I enter a museum, a venue, an open site, and it is a found environment, but it's also a beginning of an environment I am going to transform into something. My language is music, is my artworks. Like that's how I talk about what I can talk about with my words. Same with feelings and emotions. If I can talk about it and they would be as valid, then I wouldn't be making art. It's not the specific feelings or emotions I can't talk about, it's the depth and the complexity of it that you can't simply address with words. It's not like I want to make a film, I want to make an installation, I want to work with sound. It comes from what I'm trying to say, not how I'm going to say it. Once I feel focused and taken and go into the flow of this process, anything that appears to me feels the organic instrument to come into the picture, then I take it. For me, sound is not just sonic. You know, musicality also lies in the space. Same with movement. It's not just body, it's not just choreography. So much things is how you work with it. It's also lights, it's also movement of sound. Film, in a way, is not just something to be watched. You know, it's also how I choreograph the space. Sometimes it's through moving image interaction. Same with installation, is not just an installation artwork. It's also something that interacts with the space, transforming the environment. So for me, I never need to think of how they are going to work together. They naturally work together because that's, you know, my artistic process.